As we begin our journey into writing our script, we must also talk about structure.
No, not structure.
Yes, structure. Most screenwriting teachers will tell you that screenwriting is all about structure. If you've got a good structure, you've got a good film. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'll talk to you about the types of structures that I was taught at school, and then you'll be the judge on how much it all really matters.
See, nobody cares.
Some teachers will talk to you about 3x structure, others will talk about 5x structure, and some will even bring up some weirder types of structure. But do not panic, they're all actually kind of the same. So let's dive in. The most basic structure ever is the 3x structure. And it's super simple. It's what they taught you in 5th grade when writing an essay. Beginning, middle, and end. How Aristotle made us so concerned with 3x structure 2,300 years ago. A teacher once told us, good stories have a beginning, middle, and end.
Oh wow, genius!
I also thought the same, to be honest, because any story has a beginning, middle, and end. Every person who's ever been in an awkward family dinner has told that to their bumbling relatives, while questioning what was the point of what they just said.
Jim, didn't you just tell me your mom had her kitchen done too?
I always tell my mom, you passed by a store and wanted to buy a pretty handbag isn't a story, it's a fact. If she said, I passed by the store, I wanted to buy a pretty handbag, but didn't have enough money, so I had to ask for a loan from the guy at the shop. And now he wants the money back. So I need to sell the house, which isn't in my name, but in your father's name. So now I need to convince him to sell the house without him understanding that the money will go to pay for a loan that I got in order to buy a pretty handbag. Now that would be a story. Although they seem logical to me, maybe 2,300 years ago it was pretty innovative. Can't imagine how even more boring those family dinners must have been before Aristotle formulated this now well-worn formula. You introduce us to your characters, something happens to them, and then they resolve it or fail to resolve it by the end. Sounds easy, right? But just like with everything that came out from the mouths of people that have been long dead, we have dissected it and overcomplicated everything they said to fit with our bias and save us from our own insecurities.
This is a stream, these are jutting rocks, this is a mountaintop, that's the sky.
Hence the introduction of the 3 acts, that now has evolved to be explained by Aaron Sorkin like this.
Act 1, you chase your hero up a tree. Act 2, you throw rocks at them. Act 3, you get them down. Or not. It's okay if they die in the tree.
So clearly, our understanding of it hasn't really changed much for more than 2,000 years. Because storytelling is very similar to life, or at least how we would like life to be. You introduce a hero or heroine who wants something.
Do you really want to see my boobs?
The story begins when something happens to him that forces him to act. He can no longer stay passive in the pursuit of what he wants, and so this inspires him to achieve his goal.
We're sending you back to the future.
In his pursuit of it, things won't always go well, and eventually he will feel like he has lost everything. In a moment of hopelessness, he decides to learn from his previous mistakes and persevere, being reinvigorated by the struggle now that he has finally understood what was his flaw.
I've decided to become a mensch. You know what that means? A human being.
He then either gets what he wanted or not, but he has at least evolved throughout the journey, or failed to evolve in case of tragedies.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
That doesn't sound very complicated.
It isn't, but some teachers will argue that truly understanding the ins and outs of 3x structure is crucial for you to tell a good story. So let's indulge ourselves and delve right into the more complicated stuff.
Here we go.
The idea of a formal 3x structure for a script was popularized in Hollywood by Sid Field when a studio executive read his book Screenplay. In a simple way, it goes like this. Act 1, inciting incident, want, and dramatic question. Why is the story starting here? Why now? These are important questions to start asking before you write. Because in Act 1, we must set up the protagonist, the antagonist, the world of the story, the tone, and the story's dramatic question or theme.
Damn!
Some claim that all these should happen in the first 10 pages.
But why?
I turn my nose at that, because this is not mathematics, right? Tip: you have to introduce all these elements, but stay away from exposition early on. Let it unfold, because you still have to grab your viewer's interest. An easy way to do it right away is to start with a bang scene. Something that is different than the main setup, but grabs the attention straight away and hooks people by raising the stakes and forcing the viewers to ask questions. Horror films start with a scary scene, Bond movies start with a chase, and then they go back to the calmer setup of the main story. Within all this ingenious setup, it is crucial that you also introduce the audience to what your protagonist wants.
Beatrice Russo.
This is very important to know as early as possible, despite still trying to be subtle, so that we can emotionally relate to him. But he's not ready to act on his want yet. He's too afraid of what's at stake. Much like we, humans, behave in life. We might want to have a nice, calm life, but we do nothing for it because we also want to live in the big city. This desire, mixed with the fear of losing what he already has, should create stakes, both internally and externally, for your protagonist. Once all this has been set up, the story has its first turning point, when the protagonist can no longer maintain the status quo and has to start embarking on the journey to act on his want. Some people call this the inciting incident, others call it catalyst. It doesn't really matter the name. What matters is that this conflict forces our character to act. Like Luke stumbling upon Leia's message.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Or even Antonio getting a bike for his job in The Bicycle Thief. Aristotle believed that the protagonist should undergo two things, recognition and reversal of a situation. Something had to happen from the outside that inspires him in a way that he didn't realize before. So this inciting incident will bring out the earlier want from our protagonist and force him to act and make choices, which start him on the path to change. But remember that as an audience, we only care about the character's desire if there is something at stake. So we must understand exactly what they fear and why they didn't act on this desire before. Tip: when setting up your story arc, remember to make the first 15 pages the most memorable. When a producer or studio executive is deciding whether to produce your script, you have to hook them with the first 15 pages. I know it sounds insane, but it's true. Even if you're going to proof check it, focus on the first 15 to 30 pages. Because if they pass that benchmark, it means they really like it, and the typo isn't going to stop them from buying it.
Tell me why.
Why is this incident important to them? Is one of the most crucial questions we should answer straight away. But protagonists are not yet fully ready at first. They will resist to change, just like we usually do in real life. However, then something happens that stops them from being able to go back to their normal day-to-day life. Now they are forced to take action and make a difficult choice. This is the moment when Luke finds out that his aunt and uncle have been killed. It is also the heartbreaking moment when Antonio's bicycle is stolen. Now that they're taking action, there is a plan ahead.
We need to form a band.
And they've finally started their path to change, entering a new world, which some structure purists will claim always happens around page 25 to 30. Act 2. Obstacles and sacrifices. But change isn't easy, and that's why our protagonist will be forced to make many hard choices. Choices that affect not only him, but also those around him, and even the story we are telling. Yet these choices will also lead to growth, and to finding out who he truly is. And that's probably why Act 2 is the longest of the three. According to Sid Field, it finished somewhere between page 75 on a 100-page script to page 90 on a 120-page script. So if you want to be a mathematician who writes scripts, understand that it ends 2/3 of the way.
But with this second act, it's always so messy.
Only messy because we don't have as much control here. This act is where the protagonist encounters obstacles one after another, and because of them he struggles to achieve his goal, but is forced to change in a way he wouldn't otherwise. He's forced to go on a journey of self-discovery that before he didn't want to go. This is Luke joining Han Solo and Obi-Wan to rescue Leia, and it is also Antonio looking for his bicycle everywhere. But our protagonists are still resisting change here, being held back by their normal world and by who they were in the beginning of the story. On this journey, our protagonist will meet other people who have different personalities and qualities that he's lacking, which will lead to the eventual understanding of his flaw. But right now, they are still holding on to who they were, and so because of that, they'll be overwhelmed with all the struggle and they will fail, by making things worse for themselves. This will be the lowest point in the story, where it seems the heroes have no chance now. What Blake Snyder called the all is lost moment in his book Save the Cat. A book I only recommend if you want to be a mathematician and not a writer. Again, remember,
Stop! Or my mom will shoot!
Anyways, this all is lost moment is Luke failing to protect Obi-Wan as he dies. Or this is Antonio almost getting beaten or almost losing his son in the pursuit of his bicycle. Tip: often tension fades away in the middle of a script, becoming boring. So always return to your dramatic question and your ending. If you know where your characters are going, then it will make it easier to stay focused in the second act, since every scene should theme-wise or plot-wise be leading to that climactic end.
That's the way it crumbles, cookie-wise.
The key to the middle of any story is to make the protagonist's journey as difficult as possible. So it seems like he's never gonna be able to win at the end. Just like when you're telling a story to your friends. Once you've set it up, you're then basically just trying to make it seem that it was so complicated, so hard, and yet you still succeeded. You're basically incepting a thought in their mind of there's no way he'll manage to get that, or there's no way that will work, etc.
I say to Bilson, with all due respect, no, I stand up and I say to Bilson.
And as you keep telling the story, it must sound even bigger than the previous part, even more difficult. It's like a joke that keeps on getting even more unbelievable. You don't want to spoil the biggest or the most comedic or dramatic choice you had to face early on. You build up into a climax, unless you are a boring aunt at family dinners. So the same way, you should also raise the stakes of the story, and each obstacle should be greater and harder than the one that came before, raising the question, how the hell did he manage or she manage to survive this, or to get there? Raising the stakes is very important. Think about it. When you go to a nice restaurant, you start with the appetizers, then the main course arrives, and only once you're full, then you slowly move onto small desserts. You don't get out on the main dish. You can, but some people want what filmmakers call a denouement. They want a little aftertaste after the climax, tying up all the loose ends, which we'll talk about in Act 3.
Cream? No, thank you. I take it black. Like my man.
Yet, for now, here are a few techniques I was taught on how to raise them stakes. Bring the protagonist into new places, where they've never been before. This will undoubtedly create conflict, as they don't know how to behave, or don't know the exact rules of this place. Every place has its rules. You go to a fancy restaurant, and there are a set of unwritten rules you must abide to.
How the f am I funny? What the f is so funny about me?
If a person comes into a chicken shop, acting like they're in a fancy restaurant, there will inevitably be some small, maybe even big conflict from that.
What is it?
It's like a dumpling, you know?
Oh, I couldn't.
Use subplots and secondary characters to bring new conflict. More on that later. Especially if they are the opposite of the protagonist. Their arrival will create drama straight away.
You went full retard, man. Never go full retard.
It's the crux of the buddy cop film, and Pixar has become a master at using this technique.
Oh. You want some?
Complicate things for your protagonist. They think something is going to work, but it doesn't. Now he has to figure out another way. Throw obstacles at him, introduce new problems, make things worse for them.
The old good news, bad news. Good news is I escaped. The bad news is I can't get into the window. The good news is I have a gun. The bad news is when I break through, the thing falls off and it's pulling me out. The good news is I'm smart enough to take it off.
Yippee-ki-yay, mother.
Pixar's rule number one is, you admire a character for trying more than for their successes. So make them try everything and still fail. Usually a filmmaker would tell you to watch a very artistic film to give you an example. Instead, I would tell you to watch Spider-Man 2.
They love me.
And see how everything only seems to get worse for Peter Parker. Whenever things seem to go right, they go way worse. Whenever he tries something new, he eventually fails. He can even deliver pizza on time. That's why we want him to succeed so much.
Pizza time.
Give your protagonist a flaw or a complicated backstory, something that in a metaphorical way or even physical way comes back to haunt them. Introduce us to the antagonist. Let us know him a bit more, so we understand his motivations and what's at stake for our protagonist. More on this later.
Okay, friend.
Think of how can the hero losing impact him, the people around him and even his community. Then explore that.
What more could I lose?
Use the middle of your story wisely. This is often called the midpoint, and it tends to be a low point or a fake high where we feel that everything is going swell, but it's all temporary, as it quickly gets even worse. This big reversal in the story is a great way to raise the stakes and to keep the story interesting. Act 3 – Transformation. The last act is comprised of the ending, and it's one of the most important acts in your film, as it will be your last chance to explore a dramatic question and therefore the theme of your film, aka what you want to say about the world, people, subject matter, etc. Tip: avoid having anything coming out of nowhere in Act 3. Set it all up in Act 1 and 2 so that Act 3 is all about payoff.
This is the end.
The stakes are high, there is a moment of crisis. Our protagonist has faced loss. But now he must make a big choice and basically put his shit together. He now knows what he needs to do and must overcome his weakness in order to become a new and better person. Yet, it won't be easy. The final climactic battle, which definitely doesn't need to be a battle, but more like some sort of confrontation, even an inner one, depending on the film, will be his hardest challenge yet, as there is still a part of his old self that he can't fully let go. But faced with the hardest choice of his journey, during the climax, the character will finally destroy his old self and change. or fail to do so. This moment of transformation and change is actually what your film is about, and therefore the theme that you wanted to explore. This is Luke being able to master the Force and destroy the Death Star by doing what Obi-Wan told him, to listen to his inner self. That's a theme right there, even in a pew-pew spaceship film. But it is also Antonio failing to find his bicycle and instead choosing to steal one, ending up embarrassing himself in front of his son. In most American stories, the protagonist ends up getting what they wanted. It's the American dream in a nutshell. But your ending will depend on your own morality and what serves the dramatic question of the story that you want to tell. Rocky doesn't have to win the fight. In fact, he doesn't. He loses it in the first film. Exercise. Choose a few movies you admire and outline them, looking for similarities in their structure. How long does each film take to set up the protagonist? What are the different beats of Act 2? What are the turning points that move you through the acts?
Easy peasy lemon squeezy!
There's been many interpretations and simplifications or complications of this 3-act structure that Aristotle laid down. Joseph Campbell, for example, famously talked about the monomyth or the hero's journey in his book A Hero with 1,000 Faces, theorizing that all myths, fables, religions and stories follow very specific structures. They tell the story of a hero who leaves the comfortable, known world and ventures into the dangerous unknown, often at great risk to his life, in order to bring something back to his community or people. It's pretty much the same as we just discussed. Christopher Vogler simplified his theory into 12 steps. 1. Ordinary world. We set up the characters and their normal, mundane world, where there is something missing for our protagonist. 2. Call to adventure. This is the inciting incident we previously talked about, where something happens that changed his routine. 3. Refusal of the call. But the hero is still not ready to let go of his comfort. His life has always been like this, so he refuses this call to adventure.
And this is a very unusual time.
Usually this can be connected with the hero's flaw, but more on that later. 4. Meeting with the mentor. But now he can't return to his normal life. And having met a mentor, he's ready to 5. Crossing the first threshold. This is when he finally accepts the journey and ventures himself into the unknown, the special world, which leads us into Act 2. 6. Test allies and enemies. This is a series of obstacles and tests that our protagonist will face in order to begin his arc and his transformation. 7. Approach to the inmost cave. This is the midpoint of the story, where the protagonist finally faces himself and what has been dragging him down, by being confronted by whatever holds the ultimate power in his life. It usually tends to be the antagonist, a love interest, or a father figure. 8. The ordeal. Our protagonist faces the biggest challenge yet, perhaps even experiencing a symbolic or not so symbolic death. 9. Reward. The protagonist gets what he wanted in the beginning of the journey. 10. The road back. The protagonist returns back to the ordinary world, having gotten what he wanted, but his world is now no longer the same it was in the beginning.
But you happen to pull this shit while I'm in a transitional period and I don't want to kill you.
11. The resurrection. The protagonist experiences a final moment of symbolic death and rebirth, so he's able to understand that what he wanted wasn't what he needed. 12. Return with Elixir. The lessons learned from the journey are what allows him to improve the ordinary world, creating for himself a new world. This has been quite cleverly simplified in the book Into the Woods, where John York writes Act 1, thesis, Act 2, antithesis, Act 3, synthesis, which is basically the ordinary world, special world, new world that Campbell talked about. Actually, very philosophical concepts if you think about them. In Act 1, we establish a flawed character. In Act 2, we confront them with their opposite. And in Act 3, we synthesize the two to achieve balance. Much like when you have a baby. You start as one person who has a certain personality.
Boring conversation anyway.
But you meet somebody else with a different one, who most likely has an opposing point of view on certain things than you. So together you find the middle ground between the two and create a third one. Maybe this can be key in understanding the role of the antagonist. But more on that later.
But all these models don't work with the length of acts from Sitfield that you just talked about.
Oui, it's true, he's giving contradicting knowledge. Yes, because that's the thing. Acts are not so well defined as you might think. In fact, they're actually pretty bullshit. I know you desperately want answers and everything handed down to you. But the truth is, there are no formulas. So just see what works best for you. If you're interested, read many books about it and then make up your own structure, or whatever helps you to write.
After all, why not?
Then Harmon, for example, created his own story circle when writing for Community, which doesn't even mention any acts. It starts with a character in a zone of comfort who wants something, so they enter an unfamiliar situation. In there, they must adapt to it. Eventually, they get what they wanted, around the middle of the story, but then they pay a heavy price for it. Eventually, they return to their familiar situation, having changed.
I don't know what to do, my whole brain is crying!
It's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis all along. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, beginning, middle and end.
I can look into your eyes as you die.
But wait. What the hell is even an act? Yeah, we've been talking so much about acts and how they start and end, but what is an act, huh?
Well, now we're finally getting to the big questions. But are you ready to truly know the answers?